Everybody, we're going to get started with our session. This is our Tuesday, January 15th, legislative session, and we will begin with an invocation with Reverend Dr. Michael Armstrong from Colesville United Methodist. Is the Reverend here? No? Okay, so then we will observe a moment of silence. All of you that can stand, please do so. Thank you. And now we have a very special presentation. This is a proclamation commemorating the retirement of a dear friend, David Rodich, Executive Director of SEIU Local 500, and this will be presented by Councilmember Hucker.
Good morning, everyone. Right spot. Thank you for coming in to join in the celebration of a historic career. David Rodich retiring from his position as Executive Director of SEIU Local 500. Special thanks to his wife. Where's Lori King Rodich? Thank you for being with us today. And his family watching from afar. You've been a trailblazing... David, come on up. You know your way around this building. Sorry, I'm unaccustomed to these too. So David, you've been a trailblazing pioneer for working families, not just in Maryland, but all around the country and other nations as well. We all know that union membership and influence has been under attack and declining for many, many years. But David has bucked the trend successfully for many years as well. He's fought the good fight, working to improve the lives of thousands of hardworking members of SEIU 500 and working families all over this state. And beyond any individual campaigns, David has really been a trailblazer at union organizing by dramatically expanding the size and the scale and the mission of SEIU Local 500. From their start, representing underrepresented, underpaid service workers in our school system, David has accepted a mandate of representing really any underpaid, underrepresented workers out there. SEIU, of course, was the perfect place for him to do that, and so he's greatly expanded SEIU Local 500 to represent thousands of workers in nonprofits, thousands of our direct support workers that we count on to provide high-quality services to our individuals with disabilities. And many, many workers that I know from firsthand experience, can be overpaid and underpaid and overworked at nonprofits all over the area. So David has stood up to give them a voice and a union and representation and dignity when they really needed it. In a way, at a time that most the labor movement has been shrinking, David has certainly built up. I imagine it's the fastest growing union in the metro area and probably in the entire state. Combining the resources, and I'll personally be grateful for many years for David, all your leadership helping me get off the ground progressive Montgomery and progressive Maryland. We knew then that combining the resources and the reach 20 years ago of the labor movement with the social justice agenda and the public interest agenda espoused by many of our civil rights organizations, faith-based organizations, and uniting them into a powerful voice for working families. We won a lot of successful campaigns, passing living wage laws, laying the groundwork for the Purple Line, expanding health insurance, fighting the privatization of Care First successfully, one issue after another, and really laying the organizational groundwork for much of the organizing and activism that's happening today. David, I always knew, was one of the board members I could most count on in getting that organization going and expanding. So so David, I'll be eternally grateful for you, and we all wish you enormous success in your retirement. Let me read the proclamation that we have. And I believe our county executive is coming up for this. And where's Ruth? There's Ruth. Come on up, please. Ruth, do you have a few words to say as well? Uh-oh. Please. You have to say them on the mic.
I have to go ahead and say?
Yes, please.
But that's wait. microphone reminds me that I always have to look up to David because, of course, he is like 7 feet tall. So my name is Ruth Musicant. I'm the Executive Vice President of SEIU Local 500. And I just want to say on behalf of our local, and in particular on behalf of our COPE committee, with Travis Simon and Mark McLaurin, who lead our political department, Merle Katita, of course, president of Local 500, how much all of us at Local 500 and in the COPE committee appreciate all of the things that David has done, not just in the 20 years that he's been with Local 500, but in his 42 years with Service Employees International Union. I knew David long before I became a member of Local 500 and before he became the executive director of Local 500. We knew each other way back when we were in the same synagogue group together. We certainly spent some time talking about what it was like to be the parents of teenagers for a while. We struggled over that, and I don't know, my teenager that I was struggling with turns 30 today, so so that's been a long time. David has done so much for this local. We've more than doubled in size. We used to be just the representative for Montgomery County service support service employees. Now we represent, I don't know how many, 20 maybe 25 different organizations. So we have spread at a time when unions are so under attack, when public servants are so under attack. SEIU Local 500 has really gone in a much more positive direction, and it's through the leadership of folks like David and Merle and the COPE committee that happened. It's been a tremendous benefit to all the members of our community. So just want to say how grateful we are that David gave us so much of his time and his passion and his devotion and his experience to help benefit the working men and women of Montgomery County Public Schools and of Montgomery County and really around the state and even around the world. So thank you so much to David for all of his years of service.
Mr. County Executive.
So I would not miss this event. I had the privilege of going to your little party over the weekend. I've known David a long time, and I guess the thing that's probably stands out for me is David has always understood that unions are more than about negotiations between the employer and the employee, and that David and I talked a lot about the union role in society and the other fights that we have to make in society. I mean, it's partly why David and this union, and frankly a lot of the other unions in this county, have been there for minimum wage issues and housing issues and immigration and social justice issues, that the role of the union is building a better society, not just negotiating wages. And I look forward to David's continued engagement. He's retired, but he's not going anywhere. He's too young to stop doing things. And I know from his pictures that he comes out of the same background that I come out of, and that this is a lifelong commitment. This is a belief that what we're about here is trying to make a better society. And David's always gotten that and always wanted to talk about the broader scheme of things in which we work, not just the narrow scheme of things. And he's also talked about the need to build a different kind of relationship between workers and their employers. And when their employer is the county government or the school system, it's still the same thing. We need a collaborative, joint approach to how we go about doing our work so that we're successful. And when they're successful and the county is successful, then we've really achieved what we need to do. And we're only going to do that when we have a relationship with labor that just doesn't see us as a bargaining partner over a set of narrow issues, but when they see us as a partner in helping build a workplace and where workers have dignity, where they have a role in shaping the kind of decisions that are important to make work function better. And, I think it'll make us all healthier, and it'll make the county a smarter place to be working in. So I look forward to your continued work in the county. And like I said, you've been a great partner, and I want that to continue.
You going to help me read this? You want to help me read this?
Sure.
Okay. You've done this before.
That's smaller print. You guys get really...
Well, we got a savings plan.
Apparently.
Whereas David Rodich is the Executive Director of Service Employees International Union, SEIU Local 500, and oversees staff and works with elected leadership of the union. He has helped lead and manage Local 500 through an unprecedented period of growth and accomplishment. During his tenure, the local has doubled in member size and grown from representing just one unit to 40. And
David has helped working people across the globe. For the past 25 years, he has worked with the Solidarity Center of the AFL-CIO, where he has provided strategic guidance and support to independent trade union movements in the emerging democracies of Central and Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and Asia. And
in 2003, David took a chance with a group of adjunct faculty who wanted to organize a union at the George Washington University. He successfully championed their efforts to form the first adjunct faculty union in SEIU. This bold move blossomed from a local initiative into a national movement of faculty unionization and created a new mode of thinking about the organizing and mobilization of workers.
And David, over the course of his career, has been a trailblazing pioneer in building and strengthening institutions which serve working families across Montgomery County and Maryland, and on matters of mutual concern, and has worked tirelessly to raise awareness among elected officials and policymakers about the fierce urgency of addressing said concerns.
And whereas, above all, David is a devoted and loving family man and proud resident of Montgomery County, where he has lived for the past 30 years. He's a loyal husband to his wife, Lori, and proud father to two daughters, Alexis and Courtney. Now, therefore, do we...
Mark Elrich as the county executive, Nancy Navarro as county council president, and Tom Hucker as council member, do hereby salute David Rodich for his outstanding service and devotion to civic and public service at the federal, state, and local levels. We wish him great success in all his future endeavors. Signed, Mark Elrich, county executive, Nancy Navarro, council president, and Tom Hucker, council member.
Terrific.
Thank you so much.
Actually, can we take another photo with my colleague standing in the background? Because we all love David. Let's do that real quick.
Meet this person. For those of you that were with me Friday night, relax, no 31-minute story here. I just very, very briefly, first of all, to the council, you're more than colleagues, you're friends. And that, to me, is the mark of a relationship. I feel like with Mark Elrich as the county executive and a very progressive council led by the amazing Nancy Navarro, I think that the potential of the work we can get done for working families in this county has never been greater. I want to very briefly acknowledge my good friends Chris Lloyd, Jennifer Martin, and Angie Artis from the Montgomery County Education Association, our strategic partners in a lot of the work that we do in this county, and now our landlords too. So, you know, I really have been so touched over the last several days at the accolades, the recognition, and this is also, while I've appreciated receiving that, I also want to turn the table around a little bit and acknowledge that for anybody that's involved with leadership, there's no single individual that does it. I work for, or worked for, I'm trying to learn this past tense thing a little bit, the most extraordinary union that in my 42 years of working with SEIU, the single greatest job I've ever had has been, and I've had a lot of them, has been working with this Local 500. And I just, you know, cannot do this with acknowledging the amazing leadership of Merle Katita, who has granted me the privilege of partnership in working with her. Nothing could have happened in terms of the work that we did without having a visionary leading the organization, supported by and working with an executive board made up of the finest group of rank and file leaders this guy has ever had the privilege of working with. So I just, thank you. I want to salute you. Lori, thank you, as always, for your amazing partnership in this journey, too. And I just want to end by saying, kind of where I started this a couple of minutes ago, that I think that the best days of the American labor movement are frankly in front of us. We've built an amazing legacy and partnership. We've built a very, very strong foundation for this movement to move forward with. And my honest belief is that if we listen to members, we trust members, we focus on the vision of not what can't be done, but the vision of what is really possible, and to be able to work in partnership with an amazing county government, the very, very best days are in front of us. From the bottom of my heart, thank each and every one of you for being this morning. Counsel, thank you so much for this recognition. You don't know what it means to me. And on with your meeting. I'll see you along the way.
Well, this is a great way to start the morning. Okay, so now we are on to general business, announcements, and agenda and calendar changes. Let's see, Ms. Paradise.
Good morning. We have two announcements today. The public hearing on the FY20 capital budget and amendments to the FY19 to 24 CIP for county government, Montgomery County Public Schools, Montgomery College, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, the Revenue Authority, and the Housing Opportunities Commission, and WSSC's FY20 to 25 CIP is scheduled for February 5th 2019 at 7:30 p.m. And the council is seeking applicants for the Public Election Fund Committee. The application deadline is February 6 at 5 p.m. There were no petitions this week.
Thank you so much. Also, we have item 2, Martin Luther King Jr. Commemorative Planning Committee invitation and celebration announcement. For that, I'm going to ask Mr. Stowe if he can tell us a little bit about what's coming and what a wonderful celebration that is being planned. Yeah, there's a microphone. And
Thank
if
you,
there's-
Madam President, members of council. I'm going to ask our committee to
Yes.
come down. These are folks that were and are involved in the planning process. You may know then that the county executive names these persons, and they help us throughout the year with the planning, and we're so glad to have all of them here to show their support and commitment to what we do. So, Madam President and members of council, we are delighted to have folks with us, and I'm asking them to give a shout out real quick. I'm gonna start right there. Real quick. Julia Norman. Thank you.
Tawana McFadden, Marsha Thomas, Rose Taylor, Sonia Bauer.
James Fenner. Here. Martin Rooker.
Very good. Martin serves also as our chair. And so we're delighted to share with you that this year's event is set for the 21st of January. Our theme this year is Women of the Dream. We're going to highlight women who were not only inspired by Dr. King, but also worked with him and marched with him and were so committed to the cause that they, in fact, then still live their lives in the kinds of ways that are instructed from the movement itself. And so this year, we're going to highlight a woman by the name of Joan Mulholland. Joan Mulholland was one of the folks who was on the initial Freedom Riders. You may recall they went down south trying to test the new law relative to intercommerce transportation. And of course, as you know your history, you will be aware of the fact that that did not quite happen the way we had intended. And they, in fact, encountered a number of incidents of violence along the way. So she's going to tell her story. Wonderful, wonderful lady indeed. We also have Willie Pearl King. Willie Pearl King is the woman you may recall. Well, maybe you don't know this. She's a woman that, in fact, took the bits of pieces of paper she had gotten from Dr. King and began to transcribe this thing she was transcribing on behalf of him to get out to the local clergy in Birmingham. She was the person who actually put together the letter from a Birmingham jail. She lives in Montgomery County. We're excited to have her come and be a part of this event as well. Dr. Ruby Reese Moon, one of our own, who also in her early days living in Georgia, worked with Dr. King in so many very special kinds of ways, pushing forward the idea of education and how important it was, not only for those of us who have been people of color, but for all persons indeed. And also we'll pick up then Fannie Lou Hamer, the Voting Rights Act, and the work that she did down in Mississippi. And also then we'll highlight Coretta Scott King, of course, as she was not only the partner, but in her own right, was able then to move forward with the civil rights movement in many ways, not only working with Dr. King, but in many instances complementing Dr. King. So those are our, in fact, highlights for the program. We're pleased and excited about having Chelsea Green, international artist. She is a jazz violinist. You may recall that she performed for President Obama. And also we found out that she is and was a resident there at the Music Center at Strathmore. So we're very excited about all this. I would also share with you, we've got then our local participants. We've got a group from Blair High School coming. We've got ballet this year. We've got all kinds of opportunities for spoken word to take place as well. And so we're very excited that this is coming, this is happening, but there's one thing missing. And that is to say then, we need you there. Everyone in this room, we need you to be out there at the Music Center at Strathmore. We're asking you to come at 2:30. We'll form the line at 2:30. It'll be free tickets on the day of the event. No tickets in advance. On the day of the event, you get a free ticket, and we'll open the doors promptly at 3 o'clock. We also got some additional special guests, and they are our council members. They are our council members. Every single one of them will get a script today. Every single one of them will get a script today that will have them being involved in this program. So we're not asking them just to be present. We want them to be actually involved in the program. So they will all be there participating. We're very excited about that as well. So, Madam President, members of council, the date again is Monday, January 21st. The Music Center at Strathmore is the location. Be there at 2:30. Start a line at that point in time, and at 3 o'clock, we'll open the doors promptly, and we promise to have you back home, no later than 5:45. Is that right, folks? That's right. All right, then. Madam President, that's our presentation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stowe. Before I turn over to Councilmember Rice, I have to acknowledge that this is a very special way to kick off the celebrations from celebrating Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. This entire council, along with about 30-plus top leaders in the county, spent Thursday and Friday at a racial equity training led by the Racial Equity Institute, and I'm so pleased to say that everybody was very engaged, and we are now super energized to continue our work to develop this racial equity policy this year. And so I think it's going to be a very great way to launch into this work as well by celebrating the extraordinary achievements of such an amazing leader. With that, Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. And let me just say that it is going to be a great program. So much so that one of your council members is actually going to be there, but not be there, but still be there. So you'll have to wait and see for that. Let me say that folks know that I'm actually headed to Ethiopia tomorrow morning, and we'll be meeting with Ethiopia's first woman president. And Saleh Work Zewde, who is Ethiopia's first female president, got elected based on her focus on gender equality and also promoting peace, something that ties directly in to the dream and certainly ties into the program. And so I look forward to being with my colleagues, although I may not be there in person. I look forward to being there and certainly playing a part in this great program. So to you, Director Stowe, there is no excuse for anyone, being that one person is going to be halfway around the globe and still a part of this program, that you should not be there. So that's a message to all our county residents and all folks in this room. I challenge you to do the same. So thank you very much for all the great work of the committee.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and especially to the committee for working so hard to bring us this amazing celebration. And once again, the public needs to be there, enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much. Thank you
Madam
very
President, I
much.
would be remiss if I did not say that today is Dr. King's birthday.
Yes.
Today. So again, we're very excited about being here today, and thank you again for your
Absolutely.
willingness to have us here.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, so now we are on to the minutes, and the minutes for, let's see, this was December 4th, 2018, have been distributed in advance to all council members. Are there any corrections? Hearing none, they are approved. Okay, now on to consent calendar. I need a motion and a second.
Approve the consent calendar.
Been moved by Councilmember Reamer and seconded by Councilmember Rice. I do not see any lights for discussion, so with that, all those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Excellent. Now we're on to District Council session. This is item 4. A is introduction, zoning text amendment 19-01, accessory residential uses, accessory apartments. The lead sponsor is Councilmember Reamer. We have a public hearing scheduled for February 26 at 7:30 p.m. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you much, Council President Navarro. This proposed zoning change is to address a lot of restrictions and barriers in our zoning ordinance as governing accessory dwelling units. And an accessory dwelling unit is, if it's detached from a house, it's what you'll often hear is described as a tiny house. It's a small house in a backyard that has been, or a side lot that has been perhaps converted from a garage or constructed. If it's inside the house, you'll sometimes hear it referred to as an in-law suite or perhaps an English basement. It's an apartment built inside of a house. And in any event, an accessory dwelling unit has to have a kitchen and a bath and a separate entrance, and it can't be accessed from the main house. So the the cost of building an accessory dwelling unit is pretty substantial. They're typically above $100,000 to construct, and given the cost, the regulatory environment for accessory dwelling units is really, really important. A few years ago, the council took up the accessory dwelling unit ordinance and made a number of compromises in the ordinance that I think split the baby one too many times, and as a result, we have not really seen significant accessory dwelling unit production. Just as an example, you can't build at a detached unit on a property unless you have at least an acre. Not a lot of homeowners have an acre or more in Montgomery County. You can't build one basically if there's another one on your block, regardless of the parking environment on your block or other things due to a distance requirement of several hundred feet from the nearest other unit, so on and so forth. So what this zoning change does is allows detached apartments as a limited use in various zones, R200, R90, R60. It allows an accessory apartment in a basement. It deletes the maximum size of the unit, deletes the distance requirement between them. It allows one, if the accessory structure was built before 2012, which was another restriction. And then it maintains a number of important protections. For example, the property must have 2 off-street parking spaces. Any setback requirements that apply to the house, which we have a lot of very specific requirements if you're building a house, also apply if you're adding an accessory unit. And there is a limit on the number of people who can live in a unit, just as there is a limit on the number of people who can live in a primary residence. This is important because this type of housing is very useful, not only generally, it is inherently more affordable because of its nature, but also a lot of families find that it is a terrific solution as if you are a parent or a grandparent, your older children, or if you're a younger family, your parents or grandparents, families that have an adult with developmental disabilities, families who have siblings or relatives who want to live nearby. It is a terrific housing solution, and jurisdictions all across the country are beginning to focus on this type of housing. It's often called the missing middle. It's a type of housing that communities don't create if they have very strict zoning policies. So the intent here is to try to establish an effective ordinance that will embrace accessory dwelling units as a good housing solution and not try to just simply regulate them out of existence as though they are a nuisance. And I hope that my colleagues will give this careful consideration and we'll work through it at the committee. This coming Saturday, I am hosting a policy forum where I will share more details. Well, all the details are shared because it's public, but we'll talk this through, and many people will be in attendance, and that is open to the public. It'll be here in this room at 9:30 on Saturday morning, and our public hearing will be in February. So look forward to consideration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Reamer, for introducing this particular ZTA. I think that everywhere we go, conversations about housing and the need to be creative. It's a constant. I know that at the Council of Governments, this is one of the major policy areas for the year, and Mr. Science seems to be very eager to make a comment.
No, just one slight clarification. The number of people in an accessory unit is not limited in total people. It's limited in the adults to 2 adults.
Great.
Which is important if you have children.
That is
Right.
very important. Wonderful. Okay, so now to item B. This is the zoning text amendment 19-02, clinics, limited use, and the lead sponsor is myself. Public hearing is scheduled for February 26 at 1:30 p.m. This ZTA is a relatively minor change to the code that would allow medical or dental clinics that are limited in size in all residential zones as an accessory to certain large institutional uses as a limited use. It would not change the code to go back to allowing any incidental or subordinate use as an accessory use. The amendment would only liberalize accessory use rules for clinics in any one large residential care facility, charitable, philanthropic institutions, large child care centers, private educational institutions, or place of religious assembly. And the clinics with more than 4 practitioners would only be allowed as a minor part, 5% of the use's total floor area of the principal use. The goals of this CTA is to supplement the availability of medical and dental clinics on an outpatient basis in areas of the county that may be underserved. In zones where these clinics are currently allowed as a conditional use, the standards will not change. There will be limits on the size of the clinics that will be regulated by the Department of Permitting Services. And this, I think, comports with some of our major policy goals regarding access to health care. We know we have a lot of religious institutions that have stepped forward to provide some of this, and this would also just help strengthen that. So with that, let's see, Councilmember Rice, your light is on.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to be added as co-sponsor to that.
Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, we, let's see, are on to our item number 5, which is the legislative session, day 2, and we have introductions of bills. Bill 1-19, Police Officer Involved Death, Independent Investigation. The lead sponsor is Councilmember Jawando, and the co-sponsors are Councilmembers Rice, Reamer, Council President Navarro, and Councilmember Albornoz. There's a public hearing scheduled for March 5th, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. And I see Councilmember Jawando, believe it's on first. No? And then Councilmember Katzak. I'll turn it over to Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you. I
And then I'll
didn't
have
press my
Council.
button as quickly as I should have.
I know, this is
But
a
thank you-
race to the
thank you-
buttons.
Thank you for deferring.
But I will defer to you and turn it over to Council Vice President.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. I'm very excited to be introducing my first bill here, the Law Enforcement Trust and Transparency Act. I want to just briefly just set the frame of why I think this bill is critically necessary where we are right now in our nation's history, but also here in the county. It starts with the fear, the moment in certain communities, particularly communities of color, when your heart races. Your anxiety level increases and you remind yourself that everything that you've been taught over the years of how to stay alive in situations involving the police runs through your head. This is not hyperbole. This is the reality for far too many people in this country when police-involved interactions occur. I felt this way myself. Many people will acknowledge the widespread racial inequities, and in fact, we heard about the very depressing and unfortunate data in our training, racial equity training this last week across the American criminal justice system. But we don't often discuss the consequences and what those inequities mean in practice for real people. The reality is that data has overwhelmingly supported the fact that black people are much more likely to be shot by police than their white peers. An analysis of available FBI data by Dara Lind for Vox found that U.S. police kill black people at disproportionately high rates. Black people accounted for nearly 31% of police killing victims in 2012, even though they make up only 13% of the U.S. population. Now, let me also say we have a very good police department here in Montgomery County. I'll say it again, we have a very good police department with officers who are professional, dedicated, and serve with integrity. I know this because I've seen their responsiveness in my community and their engagement through youth basketball and other outreach activities. I also know because I served as an AmeriCorps member with Montgomery County Police before college. And I spent time as an honors intern at the FBI, and many, many of my mentors today are law enforcement. That doesn't change the fact that in this climate, both nationally and locally, these issues exist. And in order to build trust in communities, we must continually reevaluate how and what we are doing to maintain the trust that our citizens freely give to our law enforcement officers. We have had our own incidents here in Montgomery County, most recently 7 months ago in the tragic death of Robert White in Silver Spring. And while reflection is important after moments such as these, we are now tasked with the obligation of figuring out how to move forward, learn from these incidences, and turn a moment of anger, confusion, and frustration into an opportunity to make positive change in how we administer justice. This bill will require independent investigations and publicly shared reports that I believe will help address any real or perceived conflicts of interest with local investigations. We've already taken a leadership step in this county with prosecutorial referrals being shared in neighboring Howard County, and this bill would complement that effort. This is another way we can lead here in Montgomery County. Independence, transparency, and building trust. That's what this bill is about. For community members to feel safe and for our officers to be able to do their jobs. Trust and transparency are essential. We should make every effort to address these challenges and strive to make a more inclusive, fair, and just America. And we have the opportunity to begin that and lead right here in Montgomery County. I want to thank my co-sponsors, Council President Navarro, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Reamer, and Councilmember Albernaz for joining. And I look forward to the public hearing on March 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jawando. Council Vice President Katz.
Thank you. Council President, I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando, so then it would be actually Rice. Is it Friedson? Okay, Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. And I just wanted to commend my colleague for introducing and on this critical issue, and I would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And I really want to thank the lead sponsor, Councilmember Jawando. He and I had a conversation about this when he was talking about the bill. And one of the key points in this whole thing is that we pride ourselves here in Montgomery County on transparency. And transparency breeds the trust that Councilmember Jawando is talking about. I think that we have a great relationship here in Montgomery County. I'm born and raised here, and I remember when we had challenges here in Montgomery County when it came to driving while black, when it came to issues of police use of force. And our chiefs over the years have done a great job in continuing to promote an environment that continues to say that our constituents need to be treated fairly and equitably. And that's important. The key is that unfortunately, as in any workforce, private or government, there will continue to be people who skirt the lines. And it is important for us to make sure that we have processes in place that allow for us, both the community and the government, to respond in those instances and make the necessary changes. That's what this bill is about. And I really want to commend Councilmember Jawando for continuing to build on the great advances that we've made when it comes to building a relationship between law enforcement and our community. And this bill is going to continue to do that. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to applaud my colleague, Councilmember Jawando, for introducing this bill. It is an important one to me. The underlying incident that occurred that spurred this legislation, the death of Mr. Robert White, occurred 5 blocks from my home. And so I know that we can and must do better. And I would like to add myself as a co-sponsor.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass. Councilmember Reamer.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Jawando, for introducing this bill. It's good work. Just wanted to amplify on a point you made, or 2 points you made. I think there's some confusion in the public today about the process that we use. We presently follow a best practice, which is after an investigation of an incident, the Howard County State's Attorney's Office decides whether to file a charge. But implicit in that statement is that our own internal affairs team and our MCPD does do the investigation. Of course, no one is suggesting today that there has ever been a problem with that, or and I'm not aware of any incident where that has been a problem. But I think a lot of people ask the question, is it a best practice for a department to handle its own investigation, or is there an additional check or balance needed in the process? So this legislation would add an independent investigation to that process. And as a result, I think will result in improved confidence in the process itself and should be modeled as a national best practice. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Albornoz.
So I want to add to the chorus of acknowledging the great leadership of my friend and colleague, Councilmember Jawando, on this important bill. Having been a lifelong resident of Montgomery County, I can also acknowledge and confirm what a phenomenal police force we have here in Montgomery County. Our first responders are among the best in the country. And as the former director of the Department of Recreation, I can tell you of dozens of instances in which our law enforcement officials, often on their own time volunteering, would work in communities with their at-risk youth. And I am proud of the work of our law enforcement officials, but also acknowledge that transparency is one of the pillars that makes Montgomery County such a special place. And we must continue to stay ahead of the curve to ensure that our residents have the confidence in our government as a whole, and certainly our first responders especially. And so that's why I'm happy to co-sponsor this bill, look forward to the public hearing and any discussion that follows, but just wanted to add to the list and acknowledging the great leadership on this work.
Thank you. Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Council Member. I want to be added as a co-sponsor as well.
Thank you so much. Okay. So with that, I'm going to propose a closed session to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice pursuant to Maryland Code General Provisions Article 3-305 B7. The topic is potential litigation.
So moved.
It's moved by Council Vice President Katz and seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and right after, that was unanimous, and right after our closed session, we will reconvene here at 1:30 in open session for public hearings. Thank you so much. (18-12) Setback exemptions fences. The CTA will revise the standards for an exemption to the building line and setback requirements for certain fences. A Fed Committee work session on this CTA is tentatively scheduled for Monday, January 28, 2019. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business, January 22nd. For everyone scheduled to testify today, please bring copies of your written testimony to the clerk at this time. If you would like to follow the progress of this ZTA, the Council website has a subscribe function. Go to the Council website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. And for this particular item, we have Casey Anderson. He is the chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board, and I believe you will also speak to items 7 and 8, so I have it annotated here, and Gary Foley. Thank you so much for that correction. All right, we'll start with Mr. Anderson.
Would you like me to address all three of these in the same?
Yes, that would be fine.
Very good. As to ZTA 1813, the Planning Board supports this ZTA because, as you probably know, in the Regional Shopping Center Overlay Zone, taller buildings, including hotel and apartment buildings up to 150 feet, are already allowed in that zone. And so we feel that this addition of certain other uses that up to 90 feet with appropriate setback requirements is an entirely reasonable way to provide more flexibility to the owners of these shopping malls that are trying to make a transition in light of changes in the market to what sorts of land uses are complementary to their core shopping business. So that's 1813. 1814, the farm alcohol production standards. I would say the Planning Board supports this because there are a number of restrictions on alcohol production as a limited use in a variety of zones. This ZTA would simply allow farm alcohol production in the RE1 and RE2 zones if the site is at least 25 acres in size and the site is in a sewer category where no public service is planned. That means that there would be very limited circumstances under which these farm alcohol uses would be allowed in the RE1 and RE2 zones, but if you have a big enough piece of land where the use is unlikely to be obtrusive to the neighbors, we think that that's a reasonable approach, and again, consistent with the county's efforts to encourage more of this kind of economic development activity in the agricultural and related residential zones. As to ZTA 1812, we were all surprised to learn that the code does not already allow for taller fences near railroad lines. That seems like a sensible thing to permit property owners to shield themselves from the impact, not only of the Purple Line, but potentially other rail lines or transit service right next to their property. So the Planning Board supports that ZTA as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Foley.
My name is Gary Foley, and I live at 4207 East-West Highway between Connecticut and Wisconsin Avenues in the Edgevale, East Bethesda neighborhood. The property line of our backyard is directly adjacent to the future Purple Line right-of-way, and I am here today to voice my support for ZTA 1812. Current Montgomery County regulation stipulates that any fence built on private property exceeding 6.5 feet will automatically be denied approval for the required fence permit. Therefore, in order to obtain a permit and proceed with installation of this fence, an exemption from the building line and setback requirements must be granted by appealing the fence permit denial through the Court of Appeals. This appeal process takes 3 to 4 months to complete, requires the preparation of sufficient documents to justify the need for an additional height, and an application fee of several $100s. After going through this laborious and expensive process, obtaining approval for the exemption is often not granted. This proposed amendment would increase the 6.5-foot limit to 8 feet for those properties located in a residential zone directly abutting the right-of-way for the rail line. This increase to the exempted fence height will provide an additional sound and visual barrier without impacting overall neighborhood aesthetics, and eliminates the burden and expense for appeal for an individual exemption. Given the number of homeowners directly adjacent to the Purple Line right-of-way, this amendment could greatly reduce the number of individual applications for exemptions, saving both residents and the county significant amount of time and expense. It should be noted this amendment does not prevent those residents with property adjacent to the Purple Line for appealing for an exemption to install a fence higher than 8 feet. This amendment simply increases the fence height before the property owner must appeal for an individual exemption. This amendment does not stipulate that a maximum fence height that may be installed. As someone who is experiencing the construction of the Purple Line firsthand, I appreciate that there are many unknowns related to the direct impact on this project on quality of life and personal property value once completed. It is yet to be seen how the project's planned retaining walls and fencing might mitigate the impact on adjacent properties, or what additional measures may be needed by homeowners. But by passing this amendment now to increase the exempted fence height, it will help clarify what options are available and the necessary steps that must be taken if a homeowner ultimately decides that the expense of installing a private fence is justifiable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Foley. Okay, I don't see any, we don't have any other speakers. There is one light from Councilmember Reamer.
Just want to say thank you. Thank you, Gary, for your testimony. Apologize, I just walked in after you'd started, but I caught what you said, and you did a nice job, and appreciate your participation.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, now we're on to item number 7. This is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 1813, Regional Shopping Center Overlay Zone Standards. This ZTA will revise the standard for the allowed height on certain freestanding uses in the Regional Shopping Center Overlay Zone. A Fed Committee work session on this ZTA is tentatively scheduled for Monday, January 28th, 2019. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on January 22nd. If you would like to follow the progress of this ZTA, the Council website has a subscribe function. Go to the Council's website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. Ms. Patricia Harris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Pat Harris with Lerturley and Brewer on behalf of the Unibail Romesco Westfield, which was formerly referred to as Westfield, which is the owner of both Montgomery Mall and Westfield Mall. We're here to express our support for zoning text amendment 1813 that would increase the height to 90 feet for certain uses, including a health club, retail-related services, and a parking structure for those properties located in a regional shopping center overlay zone. Notably, Montgomery Mall and Wheaton Mall are the only two shopping centers / malls in the county located within this overlay zone. As a result of how the regional shopping center overlay zone evolved, it allows buildings to have different maximum heights based on the particular use of a building. Currently, as the Chair Anderson indicated, in the overlay zone, heights up to 150 feet are already permitted for hotels and multifamily residential buildings, and heights of 90 feet are allowed for other types of uses that include a theater complex. The ZTA would permit buildings devoted to health club, retail, or parking to be constructed up to 90 feet. This change would be consistent with the overall intent of the zone, and given the heights already permitted in the zone, any development pursuant to the ZTA would be compatible with the existing permitted development. Further, the ZTA will accommodate the redevelopment of Montgomery Mall as it transitions from a traditional shopping mall to a mixed-use community in furtherance of the goals of the sector plan. Importantly, pursuant to the regional shopping center overlay zone, any increase in height is subject to the planning board's approval of a site plan, thus ensuring a finding of compatibility with the surrounding area. Moreover, the overlay zone imposes a significant setback of 3 feet for every 1 foot of building height over 45 feet. When a building abuts either agricultural, rural, residential, or a residential zone. This setback, combined with the requirement for site plan approval, ensures that any proposed retail sales, services, health club, or parking structure will be compatible with the area surrounding the mall shopping center and will substantially conform to the applicable sector plan. For these reasons, we encourage your support of ZTA 1813. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I don't see any lights. This public hearing is closed. All right, now we're on to agenda item 8. This is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 18-14, farm alcohol production, residential zones. This CTA would add farm alcohol production as an use allowed in certain residential zones and establish the standards for farm alcohol production in certain residential zones. A Fed Committee work session on the CTA is tentatively scheduled for Monday, February 4th, 2019. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on January 29th. If you would like to follow the progress of the CTA, the Council's website has a subscribe function. Go to the Council's website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. And for this particular item, we have Chris Miller and Charles Miller, if they could come forward, please. Right. Chris Miller.
Good afternoon.
Please, there's a button at the base of your microphone. Yes, there you
Does
go.
it work? Test?
Yes.
So forgive our greenness here. This is our first time doing this.
No
Thank you
problem.
for taking the time
Welcome.
to listen with us. So Chris and I, we grew up in Montgomery County. We're brothers. We grew up over on Bowie Mill Road, born and raised in Montgomery County, and we love this area. We were fortunate enough to grow up on a mini farm. I guess you could call it a couple horses, cows, chickens. And we think that experience helped groom and produce who we are today and has allowed us to go on and achieve many things. So the work ethic, mentally, emotionally, physically, that we were able to learn there really attributed to who we are. And we're looking to take that and push that into youth today. So we see constant building in Montgomery County. We think progress is a great thing, but we don't want to completely rid of the past. And a lot of times the peace of mind and the stress relief you can get from being on the farm scene and just taking a deep breath can be immense. And so we were trying to create a place and an opportunity that allows families and youth to get away from their cell phones, get away from the TV, away from iPads, and really go out and play and enjoy themselves. And so through this farm alcohol brewery, we know expensive land is in Montgomery County. And so we're looking to figure out a way to farm property, but also supplement being able to support the local farm in additional areas that aren't just reserved for for the ag reserve, or RCRNC, and additional farm areas that are 25 plus acres and are currently used for agricultural purposes. So that's a little background on us and what we're looking to accomplish, and I'll let Chris kind of speak to a little bit on.
Yeah, so as Charlie mentioned, we're from Montgomery County. We were born and raised here. And as we've progressed in life, we've realized that that agricultural background is something that we don't want to give up. And development is spreading far and wide in this county, and often it's a great thing. And we have the agricultural reserve for a reason. And this council here has taken many measures to promote the agricultural reserve, and one of which was ETA 1803. Which was a great thing, and we are in huge support of. But as part of that, a few of the farms that aren't necessarily zoned agriculture, but are just as much of a farm, if not more in some regard, were partially left out of that. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is just allow some of those zones with the certain confines of the 25 acres, a working farm, and with that sewer and septic, it really is a farm. It's not just in the middle of a neighborhood. So we're just trying to get those included as well to enjoy the benefit of preserving agriculture and green space and open space in this county. So that's the goal, and we'd be happy to elaborate on that as much as we can. I'm a little nervous, not used to this. I'd rather be on the farm. But yeah, that's it. And thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming over. I see I have Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, gentlemen. You did a great job.
Maybe you need to turn off one of those microphones. We might be back in,
Okay, there we go.
in that world again.
Thank you, gentlemen. You did a great job. Appreciate your entrepreneurialism and that part of the county. If you're successful, if the CTA passes and you're able to establish your business, it's going to have quite an array of producers. We've got Brookville Beer Farm, and we've got Waradaka and Elder Pine, and you're going to be, I hope, a tremendous addition. People are going to start coming to that general area from all over the county, and I know it has really brought something special to everyday life for people who live nearby, and so I hope that this will also be met with success, and thanks for what you're doing. You're really contributing to making this county a great place to live.
Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo those sentiments and say that, again, the biggest part of this CTA that's incredibly important that I want to lift up and highlight is the 25-acre preservation. I mean, we're talking about 25 acres of farm land, of green preservation outside of the ag reserve, right? So that's keeping additional green space outside of what we already have dedicated with the agricultural reserve, and just saying that instead of letting that go towards development and giving up on those other patches of green that we have throughout this county, how can we continue to uphold, right, those very great little working farms that are throughout the county? And I don't mean to say little, because 25 acres is pretty good size. Throughout the county. How do we continue to support that? And they're all around. They're smattered all around this county. And it really is important for us to do that and not lose sight of those areas. So thank you, gentlemen, for bringing this up to us. I think because it really is a larger part of our discussion when we talk about true conservation here in this county beyond just our agricultural reserve. So.
All right. Thank you so much. And we look forward to the work session and hopefully welcoming you to my district. Thank you so much. All right, now on to item 9. This is a public hearing on Bill 40-18, Secondhand Personal Property Dealer's License. This bill would exclude certain personal property from the definition of secondhand personal property, provide that a secondhand personal property dealer license expires 1 year from the date of issuance, and generally amend county law related to secondhand personal property. A Public Safety Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for January 28th. Persons wishing to submit additional materials for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on January 23rd. And if you would like to follow the progress of a Council bill, the Council website has a subscribe function. Go to the Council's website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. And for this panel, I see that we already have quite a number of ladies up here already. We have Brett Bates, Joanne Cameron, Karen Jones, Carol Walser, Amy Presley, and Thomas Weschler. So we do have a gentleman hopefully joining us at some point. All right, we'll start with Brett Bates.
Hello.
Hi, there's a button at the base. Yeah, right there.
Hi, my name is Brett Bates. I live at 4902 Rockmere Court, Bethesda, Maryland, and I'm very happy to be here today. I would like to thank the committee for holding this hearing today. I'd especially like to thank Councilmember Friedson and his staff members Cindy Gibson and Matt Higgins for their efforts to clarify the county's secondhand personal property regulations. Our job at Bethesda Downsizing and Estate Sales is to assist Montgomery County homeowners who are settling an estate, downsizing, or moving. Many times we work in partnership with the real estate agent either before or after the house goes on the market. Essentially, we help our clients hold their own large-scale moving sale. We've been in this business for over 10 years and have helped hundreds of Montgomery County families. It is not until the last few years that we have been notified to comply with secondhand personal property regulations. As an agent to our clients, Bethesda Downsizing never takes possession of our clients' property. We do not remove their property from their home, and we do not buy their property. This sale always takes place inside their private residence. Many times our clients are in their home during the sale, helping us sell their things. As currently written, these regulations would require us to report most of our clients' personal property to the police to make sure their private property is not stolen property. In a real-world scenario, I would need to advise my clients that before we can have their estate sale, we must report their possessions to the police and to be added to a national database of stolen property for up to 45 days. Suffice to say, our clients would be dumbfounded and heartbroken at the notion of their private property being considered stolen, and potentially angry about the intrusive nature of these regulations. It defies common sense that the county ever intended for family heirlooms and private property of average citizens to be reported to the police before their moving sale. The list of items to be reported is exhaustive, and the 45-day waiting period would be a huge burden for residents on a tight schedule to empty their home before it is transferred to the new owners. Without this legislation, these regulations would apply to each and every one of you when the time comes for you to hire a company to downsize, move, or settle a family member's estate. The goal of the regulations as currently written is to prevent pawn shops and other secondhand property dealers from buying and selling stolen property, which we support. But to impose these regulations on ordinary county residents selling their own private property and their own private home makes no sense. We urge you to approve this legislation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Joanne Cameron?
Good afternoon. My name is Joanne Cameron, and I reside at 604 Woodside Parkway, Silver Spring, Maryland. And I stand before the Montgomery County Council of Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, in support of Bill 40-18. I, too, conduct estate sales and personal property appraisals in homes throughout Maryland. Last winter, I spoke to Judy Hanger, a Montgomery County Police Department representative, when she cited me for not having a secondhand dealer's license. Imagine that one of you call one of our companies to come and sell your elderly parent's household contents because the home is being sold. Under the current application of this law, we would have to spend several hours inventorying all electronics, any luxury goods such as silverware, jewelry, furs, artwork, and the like. We would then have to electronically file a list of these items with an agency in another state using some kind of pawn shop retail software, a point-of-sale system that none of us use. In the unlikely case that an identical item might show up on a stolen goods database, for an example, a silver tray with a monogram, we would then be required to have kept all names and addresses and sales details in an office file for 1 year so that buyers could be tracked down, and we would have to turn all of this information over to the proper authorities. All of our business transactions would have to be made available for the police department to examine at their demand, and this can be a long after the seller has been paid and the items are gone and the buyers are gone. My question to Ms. Hanger was, who's going to be paying me to do your job, Judy? Why should I or the owners have to take time to do this investigative work, ask customers to verify their identity and contact information, and keep a physical file in my home office for the police department? The current regulation puts the burden of proof on us, the selling agents, to police our clients' personal possessions. I don't know whatever happened to the rule of law that we're innocent until proven guilty. Under this current regulation, we have to prove items are not stolen. rather than being served a subpoena to turn over stolen goods. None of us here before you today wish to be involved in any trafficking of stolen goods, but the reality is that stolen items are not hauled over to Grandma's house to be sold, because these items can easily be sold by anybody with a smartphone, on Craigslist or many of the other social media sites, or even in local flea markets and private yard sales. And if the victim of this theft has already been made whole by an insurance company, is it the insurance companies of Montgomery County or the Montgomery County pawn shops that are pushing for this regulation to apply to the estate sale companies? I would simply like to suggest that the police department create a website listing items reported stolen that can be accessed by the public or even sent out to weekly email subscribers. This would raise awareness and perhaps even help in tracking down these stolen goods. Asking estate sale companies to do the work of the police department
Thank you, Ms.
is an
Jones.
unfair burden
We
placed
have your
on-
testimony. We will read it.
Oh,
Thank you so
thank
much. Carol Walser?
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Carol? Oh, Karen Jones, sorry.
Turn
There
that
you
on.
go.
Okay. I'm Karen Jones. I own Greater Washington Estate Services, and we're based in Bethesda. I thank particularly Councilmember Friedson for introducing this bill so that we can speak to you today. With the time allotted, I would like to challenge the assumption that estate sale companies are dealers in secondhand personal property and define the role we play as a service industry in Montgomery County. In Chapter 44A of the County Code, secondhand property is described as, quote, previously owned goods that are being offered for sale. However, items sold in an estate sale are not previously owned. They are the currently owned possessions of Montgomery County residents who have sought the assistance of a professional liquidation company. At no time do we purchase, trade, or take possession of these items. They physically remain in the owner's home and remain their property before, during, and after an estate sale. In contrast to pawn shops and other second sale businesses, the items sold in estate sales have never entered the secondary marketplace. They remain in a private home, not a commercial venue. Police department monitoring of personal property while still in the owner's possession doesn't make any sense. Stolen goods need to be stolen before they can be retrieved. Our clients retain ownership and possession of their property at all times. The current regulation also imposes on our industry a lengthy waiting period in which to sell our clients' property. This presents an unfair and unreasonable hardship on our business. We are not dealers, auctioneers, pawnbrokers, consignment shop owners, or members of the internet marketplace community. The network in which we operate is made up of realtors, moving companies, organizers, stagers, and move managers. All of us must work cooperatively and within a realtor schedule to assure that our clients' homes go to market or closing on time and with no additional expense to our clients. To require us to inventory and postpone sale of a client's entire household for a month or more would essentially make our industry irrelevant. The client and the realtor would understandably move on because we would be unable to meet their most pressing need, our timeliness. Based on our testimonies today and the clarification of our role as service providers to residents of Montgomery County who hold good title to their property and wish to liquidate their personal possessions, we ask the Council to support Bill 40-18 and exempt estate sales from the unnecessary and unreasonable imposition of the regulations as they currently stand in the Montgomery County Code.
Thank you very much. Carol Walser?
My name is Carol Walser, and I reside at 2 Sangamore Court in Bethesda. Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me and my fellow colleagues the opportunity to testify before you today regarding Bill 4018, Secondhand Personal Property. I'm here today in support of the proposed changes and correction by excluding businesses that assist in the organization and marketing of estate sales and other personal property sales held at the owner's residence. I'm the co-owner of a business called The Market House, a downsizing and estate sales service company. Our primary service is providing assistance to families that are either moving or selling an estate by conducting a personal property liquidation in their home. I've been in the business for over 8 years, and I still enjoy helping families and the aging community that transition out of their house. However, the enforcement of registering almost all the contents of our client's home to prove that we are not selling stolen goods will not only cripple our business, but penalize our clients and prevent them from moving forward. The fact of the matter is we are not selling secondhand property. In many instances, our clients have receipts, invoices, and other supporting documentation proving their ownership. In other instances, many items are inherited family heirlooms where proof of ownership is nearly impossible. In any case, many, if not all of our clients do not have the luxury of time to prove ownership, as most sales are driven and determined by the settlement date because the house has been sold. Regarding the downsizing trend and urban movement, we provide an invaluable service not only to those moving, but to the community as well. The estate sale business impacts our community on an economic level that has resulted in an entirely separate weekend subculture. In addition to generating working revenue for our client, estate sale companies service and sell items to those people who otherwise might not be able to afford it in the open retail market. We are selling gently used items at a fraction of what they would cost new in a store. We understand that people shop estate sales for many different reasons, but we can all agree that it is largely driven by the family budget and the need to spend wisely. An estate sale has turned out to be a wonderful source for those everyday necessities, furniture, clothing, and other miscellaneous. More importantly, the goal of an estate sale is to sell and donate as much as we can, thereby keeping any remaining miscellaneous out of the county landfill, which in turn lessens the overall environmental impact. On a personal level, our estate sale service tackles an overwhelming task and becomes the very cornerstone from which a family operates when planning to move. On a professional level, some of the people who benefit from our service are real estate agents, estate attorneys, moving companies, and charities. The rest of my testimony is in writing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amy Preston?
Hello to all of those council members I know, and Happy New Year and welcome to those I don't yet. Thank you to Council Members Friedson and Katz for introducing this bill. Some of you know me as past on council, and not on the council, but on the commission. But now I own a company that's called Trusted Estate Partners, and we've been in business for just a little over 3 years. And much like these ladies, I assist families who are either going through estate settlement due to a death in the family, or who are assisting family members transition to independent and assisted living. So my co-workers and alliance partners are folks like this who I might bring in to help on the estate settlement side on the sale in-home, but there are also many, many instances where an estate sale can't be held. And it's either because someone doesn't have items of enough value to bring people and they'll still wind up spending an exorbitant amount of money transporting the other items either to donation centers or the dump, or the location of the unit is such that you can't draw enough people and the parking is a problem. So in the testimony that I have to you, I'm not going to read that, but it's 7 pages, double-spaced, of the impact really that the current Chapter 44A has, first and foremost on the families and individuals who are trying to settle these estates. If this goes forth, it's going to extend the time even further, which I'll just give you one quick example. I had one particular gentleman who needed to move his father into a unit. When a bed becomes available in some of the care facilities, especially if it's something as serious as a memory care and there's not enough room, we had to help him get moved in 1 week. And we did it, but that was because we had the help of, in that case, an auctioneer who moved things off-site for us. And again, as these ladies have pointed out, this type of business sells the entire estate. They don't purchase it. They take the estate. If it's sold on-site, I agree with everything you've said. It's the person's property. It's sold there. But sometimes an auctioneer will have to move the entire contents to another location to sell. However, these items aren't commingled with individual things. So you're not going to get someone walking off the street with a cell phone they stole out of a motor vehicle, which, as I understand from the police officers I spoke with today, which was Captain Mike Ward and also Sergeant Dan Clements. They confirmed for me that the predominant, first of all, highest level of crime is from vehicles within the county today. So the need to report things like electronics and cell phones and things like that really isn't isn't an issue with these types of estate sales. Secondly, I have a data point in the testimony I have to you that needs to be changed. I had reported, as is true, on the crime database, you'll only find 35 references to pawn shops, but as confirmed by the sergeant for me today, mostly the things involve pawn shops. Some of them may not be on the records, but that's how they help to solve the crimes and solve who exactly is doing the burglaries and the on-street sales. There is no record from 2016 to present of anything involving an auction house. And when I asked the officer and the sergeant, there's nothing that they could state to that effect either. So I am truly in support of this. I'm just really hoping that it will be broad enough to also cover auctioneers. In fact, the definition of dealer and auctioneer is
Thank
completely
you.
different. Yeah,
Thank you so much. We will take into consideration your testimony and remind everybody that there is a work session for Public Safety Committee on January 28th. Councilmember Friedson.
I just wanted to quickly thank all of you for coming in today, for the valuable service you provide for residents. Obviously, this is an increasing issue as the county ages and as these downsizing situations become more and more prevalent, particularly in District 1, which is demographically the oldest district in the county. So appreciate all the work you're doing, appreciate the fact that you've come in. I also wanted to recognize Eric Friedman, who's in the back in the Office of Consumer Protection, who has been very helpful with this process and helpful not only in the bill, but in dealing with the broader issue here. And so I just wanted to make sure that we recognized him for coming in and thank him for his support and working with my staff and Councilmember Katz's staff as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Look forward to the discussion on this bill. So we are scheduled to have a discussion with the Inspector General at 2:30, but we are ahead of schedule. I assume that we should pause, take a break, and wait until 2:30. Okay? And resume our session, and we're going to go right into a discussion of the Office of the Inspector General's Report 19-002, a review of management control deficiencies contributing to the misappropriation of Montgomery County Economic Development Funds. We're going to receive a briefing of that report. We're going to discuss it. And we're also going to hear from the administration, the Elrich administration's update on their implementation of corrective actions as it has been identified in the reports, and then whatever else type of actions they have implemented. So I know that on my packet, I see here that we do have Mr. Ed Blansett, Inspector General, Michael Morgan, Investigative Analyst, Office of the Inspector General, Andrew Klein, Chief Administrative Officer, Alex Espinosa, Director of Finance, Rich Medalino, Director, Office of Management and Budget, Mark Hansen, County Attorney, Bill Brogley, Internal Audit. If you are here, you can just go ahead and join us, and I guess we'll rotate as is needed. So I think the way that I would like for us to structure the discussion is that we will hear from the Inspector General, Mr. Blansett, regarding the findings of his investigation as that they are contained in the report. And then we should allow the administration to inform us on what are those corrective actions that they have implemented and where they are in their timeline with whatever else is needed to be done. And then we'll open it up for conversation, discussion, questions from my colleagues. So with that, I think we'll start with Mr. Blansett. Push the button. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Just trying to learn this fancy new equipment. So. All right, thank you. Well, just to start, go back to the beginning in April 2017, is my understanding the Montgomery County Office of the County Attorney received a summons from the Internal Revenue Service for all the records that are related to the former Chief Operating Officer of the Department of Economic, of the former Office of Department of Economic Development. And related to that, an entity called the Chungbuck Incubator Fund, LLC, which was a payee of the Department of Economic Development, and documents related to the Cheongbuk-do Province, a republic of the Republic of Korea, with whom the Department of Economic Development of Montgomery County had a relationship. In May of 2017, a representative of the state's attorney's office came to my office and met with us to let us know that they had initiated, along with the Internal Revenue Service, a criminal investigation related to documents that the county attorney's office had provided them that arose from that summons, and asked us to suspend any ongoing audit activities and work that we had related to that that might be related to their investigation, so that it would not interfere with that work. Later the same month, the Office of the County Attorney asked us to participate in a briefing with the county attorney's, with the county's chief administrative officer, at which time they presented all of these documents, and we had a significant discussion of the matter. And later on, the CAO, who was at the time, Tim Firestein, advised me of his intent to engage a private contractor to review the current state of the accounts payable system, and to hire a forensic auditor to review all of the county's activities, to look at, to make sure that they could identify all of the any transaction that might be fraudulent, and to identify any tainted documents, or any possibility that over a period of at least 10 years, if there were any documents that were suspect, that we could identify them, and if there were any activities that were similar to the problems that were uncovered, that were being investigated by this criminal investigation, that we'd identify them and start looking into them. At that time, I had agreed to participate in that investigation. We agreed to work together to look at all of these issues and make sure that we could uncover them and identify not only those issues, but any management issues that might be related to those matters. So what we found in the course of the time that we looked at them, we analyzed evidence that was related to fraud, waste, and abuse within the former Department of Economic Development. We looked at emails, documents, interviewed people that were a limited number of people that were related to the department. That we were somewhat constrained because of the ongoing criminal investigation, so we were not able to interview everyone that we would like to have spoken to. But I think we did a very thorough job, and along with the contractor that was engaged by the county attorney's office, Baker Tilly, I think did a very thorough review of all of the documents that were available by the county over a period of roughly 11 years. And I think the findings demonstrated to us significant mismanagement of the Department of Economic Development and a number of inappropriate payments given the circumstances. And these, in my view, were evidenced by two specific events. One was the misappropriation of funds by the chief operating officer of the department, which were the subject of the criminal indictment that came out in November of 2018. And what we found was an additional payment. There were payments for a bioscience initiative, which was developed without an approved contract vehicle and without any defined deliverables or accountability to Montgomery County. That we also were concerned was a significant, in our view, a significant problem. Problem because the conditions that we think are conducive to the findings of error and fraud are three items of the conditions of pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. We noted that in everything we looked at, we saw that people were under pressure to make things happen quickly, and in particular, they were pressured. They were trying to respond to an initiative, and DED, the Department of Economic Development, seemed very willing to take shortcuts to respond to these pressure points. The opportunity presented was that of weak management controls in the accounts payable systems and the financial systems that existed over a period of 10 years, and in the lack of segregation of duties that were in operation in the department, and in the tone at the top that was demonstrated by the management of the department. And then, of course, the third item is the rationalization, and the rationalization is simply the rationalization that leads one to simply decide that it's okay to take shortcuts and to commit the fraud or to misuse the funds for their personal, in some manner that's not intended. So what we found was that the former department directors used a 2006 agreement with a public entity to escape oversight by the county government and create a standing reserve fund for use by the DED director. That availability of that fund increased the risk of improper financial transactions, and the lack of essential segregation of duties allowed, over a period of this 11 years, the former COO of the department to divert at least $7.2 million from the county's incubator program, apparently without detection and without any apparent impact on the program's operations. In addition, in implementing the bioscience initiative, the management of the Department of Economic Development used public entities to fund the development and operations of a biohealth intermediary without executing a formal memorandum of understanding or without a contract. So we made three sets of recommendations. We made very specific recommendations in addition to a very large number of recommendations that were provided by the contractors. We reviewed all of the recommendations provided by the contractors and endorsed them, and our specific recommendations are identified in the report, but these fall into what we looked at as three sets of recommendations. One is that management should strengthen controls over financial transactions and payments consistent with and complementary to the recommendations contained by the auditors engaged by the county. That management should ensure that it divides or segregates key duties and responsibilities among people, and that management should ensure that there is an annual comparison of budgets and actual expenditures that would include an explanation of how any variance relates to actual program accomplishments. And this is the key issue that I think didn't happen, because that is how you would identify the shortfalls that would have identified the fact that things were not happening in the Department of Economic Development, and that that a shortfall had occurred in the department, that funds were missing. These recommendations are consistent with or complementary to recommendations contained in reports issued by the contractors that were engaged by the county. In our report, we also point out that the county management has provided us with a summary of the corrective actions it has taken or initiated as of October of 2018. Now, we had worked with the county management since, I'd say since about May of 2017, and while we have not examined the work that they have done to date, we do know that some of the actions that they have taken have resulted in issuances of procedures that we are very pleased that they have put in place, but they have put in place a number of accounting policies and procedures aimed at addressing the systems problems that have occurred, but again, we see ourselves as being in the position of needing to go back and take a look in an audit follow-up capacity to examine and test these controls to be sure that the controls that they indicate they have put in place and are going to put in place are effective and will actually be useful in making sure that nothing like this happens again in the future. And basically, unless, John, if you have nothing more to add, then we would turn this over at this point to the county to suggest what additional steps they might have taken.
Let's turn it over to the executive branch.
Afternoon, Madam President, members of the council. I'm Andrew Klein, the Chief Administrative Officer. First, I want to thank the Inspector General for the work that he and his staff have done on this investigation and report. As you will hear, county government is implementing his recommendations to strengthen financial oversight and controls. My colleagues will give you specifics of the actions that county government is taking and the progress we've made. I want to talk briefly about restoring and maintaining confidence in Montgomery County government. To me, the incident we are discussing today underscores that integrity is the bedrock of good government. It also underscores the importance of focusing on the value that government delivers, the results we get for the dollars we spend. One of the things that enabled this fraud was a failure to measure the benefits of the incubator program against its costs. Over the coming months, I will be entering into performance agreements with each department head. These agreements will spell out expectations about leading with integrity, financial stewardship, and performance accountability. With the help of County Stat and OMB, we will meet regularly to monitor performance, seeking to understand not just how well we are doing, but whether we are getting our money's worth. More specifically to this OIG report, I will work with the relevant directors and Office of Internal Audit to ensure that the corrective actions are completed and regularly evaluated for effectiveness. With that, let me turn it over to our Director of Finance, Alex Espinoza, to explain how we are strengthening financial controls.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go over slides 3 and 4. They'll be up on the screen, highlighting the changes that we've made in terms of financial controls and oversight over payments. Really starting since this incident came to our attention in the Department of Finance, we issued a policy in August of 2017, essentially putting in place a requirement over segregation of duties within each department. We are requiring that separate persons handle the different parts of a transaction, from authorizing the transaction at the front end to receiving the services when a contractor actually produces what's expected of them, and also processing the invoice for payment. As part of that policy that was put out in August of 2017, the Department of Finance also issued new requirements regarding sufficient documentation and support for the payment regarding these exempt transactions, these procurement exempt transactions. So whereas previously these transactions did not require and did not have accompanying documentation specifically related to the payment request, that requirement has been put in place since August of 2017. Additionally, separate from specifically what the Finance Department is doing with respect to these payments, the county has initiated a policy over these procurement exempt transactions as a result of an internal audit review that was referenced previously. That essentially will ensure that all agreements that are exempt from the procurement regulations are subject to these new policies and a new review process by representatives of the County Attorney's Office and the Department of Finance. In addition, there are several other changes that the county has implemented with respect to financial controls. We put in additional controls and authorizations relating to registration of vendors, essentially requiring that vendors self-register, and in a very limited exception basis, allowing staff in the Department of Finance to do that. Again, that is going to be on an exception basis and pursuant to specific limited criteria. Also, sometime in the fall, I believe it was in October of 2017, the Finance Department also issued a policy with respect to direct payments, essentially requiring that all payments follow a specific authorized process and limiting the number of payments that the department could issue as direct pays, that is, without going through a centralized kind of a review process. As part of that policy envisioned essentially a workflow built around the review and approval of these procurement exempt transactions above $10,000. And we've staffed up a unit, new compliance units referenced here on the slide, essentially to follow that workflow process. We've been working to staff up that unit over the past few months. We anticipate having it actually go into full effect in February. Prior to that, we've noticed departments over the last couple of months and have held workshops with them to essentially describe the process and the new requirements around this workflow. This unit will increase the county's oversight over payment processing. We'll be able to enhance pre- and post-payment audit processes to prevent and detect questionable payments. And as I indicated, this workflow will be in place to review and approve department requests to enter into procurement exempt transactions. The unit will also be working to enhance our automated systems, reporting, and initiate forensic data analysis checks, which will be designed to detect irregular payment transactions. So we're working on that now. As I indicated, we anticipate having that go live February 1st.
I'm Bill Brogley, the county's internal audit manager. You might want to look at the internal audit program activities with regard to this set of issues in 3 phases. The first phase was the review that Mr. Blansett alluded to. A report was issued in May of last year, where we looked at specific aspects of the procure-to-pay function to identify some of the high-level improvements that needed to be done. That report had emphasized the need for a procedure for an integrated review and clearance in the county of any agreement, somewhat similar to the process that goes on right now with respect to any procurement contract, as well as tightening up some of the processes for procurement exempt transactions generally. The second second phase of audit reviews that were done extended the review, one, to look at other procurement exempt commodity codes, particularly looking at 6 programs where the county had outsourced responsibilities for disbursement of county funds. Those were, if you would, similar types of situations to what had existed with DED in terms of outsourcing of funds disbursement, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't at similar risk of vulnerabilities that we had seen occurring with DED. And the result of that review was that there were appropriate segregation of duties in place. There was no inappropriate outlays of county funds that occurred under those 6 programs. We also had done a review across all the county departments and offices to look at their alignment of responsibilities, their segregation of duties. Again, one of the issues that had been identified within DED was there was one individual that was controlling too many things without appropriate checks over what that person was doing. And what we found was, as referenced in your package, was nothing similar at all to what had existed within the former DED. There were appropriate segregation of duties, key financial management, contract management responsibilities were appropriately assigned to different individuals. The third wave really is kind of looking ahead. There are additional targeted audits that we will be doing, some of which will be starting later this fiscal year, some of which were specifically identified within the Baker-Tilly set of recommendations that Mr. Blanchett had alluded to. One of the ones I've specifically highlighted here is not just focusing on specific functions within the procure-to-pay operation, but really doing a cradle-to-grave fraud risk assessment of the entire procure-to-pay function to look at what are the possible opportunities for fraud that could exist at any point, looking at the controls that are in place to ensure that we prevent and or detect fraud from occurring, and then looking at are there needs for strengthening any of those controls to make them, to improve them. In addition, there'll be an ongoing set of reviews that we'll be wanting to do to look at the effectiveness of some of the policy changes, some of the procedure changes that have been put into place to make sure, in fact, that they're working as they were designed to work. We'll be coordinating with the Inspector General's office to make sure that we have an integrated and comprehensive program to look at the controls and to identify any additional opportunities where improvements need to be made.
Rich Medellino with the Office of Management and Budget. I'm sorry I was late. Apparently, I don't have a pass that opens a door in this building yet. So I say that because I'm brand new, right? So as the junior person on this table, I couldn't even get through security. So I wanted to let you know that as you heard from Mr. Klein at the very beginning of the presentation, obviously we are going to be moving forward with enhancing the county's budgeting for results approach and trying to come up with more clear standards for all of the agencies. We've already started initial conversations about how to do that, broadly speaking, and obviously you want to see progress around economic development, which I think is probably going to be one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult areas to try to figure out what sort of results are we seeing in an immediate way, because clearly some of the things that have been funded in the county or things that you're hoping will have a 5 or 10 year or longer outcome. So as we move forward, I look forward to working with you to figure out what are the standards to hold any of the agencies accountable, but especially in this area to make sure that some of our documenting results or the lack of results would be a sign of something is amiss with a contract or a program that we're funding, and then trying to come up with the appropriate steps to immediately figure out why that's occurring and whether or not it's because it's a program that's not functioning well because it's not effective, or if there's some other fraud or abuse going on that is impacting the outcome of the program.
Guess I pushed the wrong one. All right, is that the end of the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so now we can open it up for questions or comments from my colleagues. I'm going to tee it off by just asking, I mean, obviously, we all want to make sure that all of these particular recommendations are instituted and are implemented as quickly as possible. We would like to make sure that this is not something that might be occurring elsewhere. So I am pleased to hear about the compliance unit in finance to add an additional layer of scrutiny. We are so committed to many of these economic development goals, specifically with the incubator, and a lot of work went into doing a close look at the incubator program. So of course, this is obviously was pretty much of a shock for, many of us. I guess part of what a couple of things that I just want to make sure I understand. I know on slide 6, Mr. Blancy, you discussed something. There was a quote that you said, "the tone at the top," and I wasn't sure what that meant because that's hard to define. But want to make sure that as we move forward, that what you were referring to is something that we don't promote. So what exactly did you mean by the tone at the top?
Well, tone at the top is something that is actually referred to in the accounting literature, in the general accountability, government accountability office standards, as one of the essential accounting controls, and that's the tone of management at the top levels, of setting the tone for the organization, for honesty and integrity. That's really we have actually defined that in our report. We use their definition in our report, but I like to look at that as setting the tone for integrity and accountability and basically doing the right thing.
And so is your assertion that, I guess in this particular case, when it came to the Department of Economic Development, that was not the case?
That was not what they were doing, exactly. They were taking shortcuts, they were circumventing the appropriate rules and regulations, and essentially what they were doing was they were at the top management level within the Department of Economic Development. They were encouraging their top staff to circumvent the rules. And those rules were designed to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. And by the top management encouraging them to short-circuit the rules, how could they possibly expect their own staff to take those rules seriously?
Right.
That's basically the idea.
Right.
And I think that's not the message that they intended to send, but it is the message that they unintentionally sent to the staff, and the result was obvious.
Sure. And I guess then a follow-up question to that is that, so we are really thorough in not only our internal audits, but we also have a contract with external auditors to do very thorough review of all of our transactions and our practices. What I was told was that because there were exempt transactions, that was one of the reasons why it just wasn't flagged. So it just seemed amazing that actually was the case. So did we do away with the exempt transactions, or how are we handling that? Or are we going to still maintain some but added some additional layers? I wasn't...
We're not doing away with exempt transactions. It actually would be difficult to do that, because exempt transactions just means that they're not subject to the county's procurement regulations. I think what everyone realized as a result of looking at what went on was that the controls and processes that were in place and that were generally working to ensure that fraud wasn't committed, that there was tight control over what was being spent and where the money was going, that there were improvements that definitely could be made in those processes. And the procedures that I mentioned earlier with respect to MOUs, MOAs, agreements, if you would, that didn't previously exist is one of those improvements. That new process that was started September of last year requires that any memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding, for example, that involves a payment of any sort by the county has to be reviewed now by the finance department, that there are conscious decisions that are being made about should an audit be conducted, particularly when we're outsourcing functions, disbursement functions to another entity, how frequent should that audit be conducted, who should conduct it, et cetera. So it's just a tighter set of scrutiny, if you would, over the category of transactions that are not subject to the procurement regulations.
And so what you're saying, Mr. Berkeley, is that as internal auditor, that was not the case before?
That's correct. The audit firm that had done that initial review that resulted in the May 2018 report was actually a bit surprised that there wasn't a defined process in place that governed agreements that the county entered into. There were practices in place, but nothing that said every agreement has to go through the same set of steps and sign-offs and review and checks and balances. That's now there.
Okay, probably have some follow-up questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Vice President Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you all for being here. This is obviously something that none of us ever wanted to have happen, and of course, none of us ever want to ever have this discussion again. So I know that you're working very, very hard on this. But we talked about the internal audits, and certainly we're working on those. But how about the external audits? I've had people ask why we haven't had external audits and to test whether adequate internal controls have been implemented. So can someone please address that?
Well, I could take a stab at that. The external audits that the county undergoes typically are the audits of the financial statements. Those auditors do typically test the general internal controls, and they're tested for to see how well they can rely on their controls to see if they can rely on them to test transactions. But what those external auditors are doing is they're looking at the county's financial statements. In essence, what they're looking at is the financial statements that are presented. In effect, they're verifying and validating that the financial statements that are presented to the public can be relied upon within reason. And they're testing the controls to determine that they can rely on the transactions to see if they can produce reliable financial statements. And what they have determined every year in the past, including the years in which all of these problems occurred, and they knew of the problems that were uncovered. By the way, these were not kept secret from the financial statement auditors, and they took them into consideration in rendering their opinions. They still determined that they could rely on the internal controls to produce these financial statements that could be relied upon for public consumption. So essentially what they're doing is they're testing the credibility of the financial statements taken as a whole. But they're not guaranteeing that every number on those financial statements is absolutely correct, that there's not a shred of fraud. Obviously, we know that every expenditure in there that there might have been a cup of coffee that was bought that shouldn't have been bought, that a dollar might have been misspent, but the financial statements taken as a whole, in their opinion, are fairly presented in accordance with appropriate financial statements, accounting standards, and that's what those external auditors are presenting to you. They're not guaranteeing that every underlying transaction is absolutely correct. Hopefully that.
It does, but I think.
And if I'm Mike Morgan, if I may add, the thing to remember too is when they're doing this, they're testing transactions. So they're looking at, I received these series of transactions, and are they following a flow that we are expecting, or is there something anomalous here? The way that this was done, these were not anomalous transactions. These were following a control that was in process at the time. They were documented the way they were supposed to be approved at the time. They were approved the way that they were supposed to be at the time, so there was nothing in an anomalous testing, whether it was their testing, whether it would have been our testing, that would have caused these to pop up as, oh, there's an exception. So then that leads you to the random sample method. So what's the likelihood out of all of the transactions that occur in this county in a given year, I'm likely to pick up one of these transactions and pick it up. And even then, I'm still looking at this, this is a pretty well-documented transaction. So what's wrong with this? So it's fairly difficult, I would think, for the auditor during the process of the annual financial to pick this up. It's difficult for us to pick it up, too.
And I obviously, the biggest problems that we are seeing are the exempt transactions. Is there any additional system that we could put in, whether it be random sampling and more than maybe just sampling, that we could make certain that for the exempt transactions that they have an additional scrutiny because they're not going through the regular process that we should be doing and could be doing so that we will not have someone attempt to do this again?
Yeah, so that, Mr. Katz, that'll be one function of this new compliance unit. That is going to be part of their work program, is to have a workflow around these procurement exempt transactions that are above $10,000, which is, what these are. So that unit will look at that transaction, we'll look at the department request to enter into that transaction, we'll look at the exempt code to make sure that it's a valid exempt code, that it matches up with what the department is trying to do, and otherwise complies with all of our policies and procedures. So it'll be that upfront review, which was lacking before.
Okay. Thank you.
Before I turn it over to Councilmember Glass, just one quick follow-up. So in essence, what I'm also hearing is that the issue around our program monitoring in terms of having program monitors that are marrying, because in this case, as you were saying, the transactions looked like they were absolutely legitimate. But in reality, what that money was supposed to be funding was not happening. And so that notion of, being able to have enough capacity within departments to monitor these contracts for outcomes seems like that needs to be addressed.
Yes,
primarily.
Madam President,
Yeah.
I agree, and that is what we'll be doing. County Stat has gotten away from regular discussions about performance measurement, but performance is being measured. It's just a question of, is management paying attention, how much attention, what's the level of accountability, and then also in the budget process, we're going to be developing performance measures down to the program level, so we'll get a better view, and not just about outcomes, but also outputs, effectiveness, efficiency measures. And I think collectively, it'll give us a much better chance to see, like in this case, okay, we're spending millions of dollars, but we don't see much as a result. What's going on here? Might raise that kind of a red flag.
That's right. Thank you so much. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Council President, for organizing this meeting, and thank you all for joining us, although I wish it were on a better occasion. Related to timing, it's sad, I think, that we in Rockville, the County Council and the County Executive are evaluating cutting $46 million from the current operating budget. At the same time, today we're talking about $7.2 million that was stolen from the county over a series of years. As a former journalist and a former executive director of a nonprofit, as I was reading the IG report, I just kept writing transparency, exclamation point, and wow, because it's screaming for oversight, and it is lacking, and that's the focus of today's conversation. And the one thing that the IG report says is that the writing was on the wall and that nobody read it. And I have a series of questions, and I'll limit them because I know my colleagues have other questions they want to ask. So my first question, and I hope you're able to answer them. My first question is about the timeline that's presented in the IG report. In April of 2017, the county attorney's office received a summons from the IRS requesting records related to Mr. Bang's work. In May of 2017, a representative from the state's attorney's office met with the county's inspector general to discuss the criminal investigation into Mr. Bang's actions. And in June of 2017, evidence of misappropriation was discovered, and the report says that Mr. Bang was subsequently fired. When was he fired?
I believe he was terminated on June 12th, 2017.
So he was terminated on June 12th, 2017, which is essentially what, without stating that date, that's what the report says. So my question is, why did the general public, me included, only read and learn about the egregious activity on November 16th of 2018, almost a year and a half after the fact?
John Markos, Deputy County Attorney. During the time from early April when we got the summons, I reached out to the state's attorney's office, so did Mr. Hanson, the county attorney, and we were told to allow Mr. Bang to stay in his employment for a short period of time while they continued to investigate and execute a search warrant against his property. And during that same time, we were instructed not to do a full-blown investigation with interviews of third parties, including county employees, until the state's attorney and the United States attorney that was doing a concurrent federal investigation of Mr. Bang for tax fraud had concluded their investigations and had met with and talked to witnesses before our office or Mr. Blancett's office got involved. And that investigation took a significant portion of time to be completed by the feds and the state's attorney's office.
Do you know when those investigations were concluded?
They concluded their investigations at literally on the eve of the plea deal with Mr. Bang. He did plead guilty. So they were actually in plea negotiations also at the same time they were continuing their investigation, and we're not privy to their investigatory files or when they actually finished their investigation, but they were working with Mr. Bang's lawyer right up till the plea deal, which just happened.
Yeah, if I can add, yeah, we continued to be in touch with the state's attorney's office at various points in time, and we were hopeful that this plea deal would have been concluded early on. But as time went on, other issues came up, including the need for them to trace certain repayments to Korea. And that seemed to have taken an inordinately long time. There was some thought in our minds that the repayment of the $2 million to Korea may not have actually gone back to the Korean government. And so the criminal investigation pursued that lead, but it evidently took them a long time to determine whether or not those funds actually did go back to the Korean government, and various other issues that associated with the criminal investigation evidently took longer than we had hoped they would. So it dragged on a lot longer than we thought that might take.
I had heard various theories shared with me about why it took a year and a half or why it wasn't shared until November 16th, but thank you for clarifying that information. My second question is about hidden pots of money that are explained in the IG report. It states that the special reserve account, and to quote it, circumvented management controls established by the county government, avoided transparency and oversight, and that this was possible through a 1998 grant agreement and 1998 trust indenture that establishes off-book accounts. So my series of questions related to that is, how many off-book accounts does the county currently have? Has the Inspector General done a review of these accounts? How are these accounts managed? And how do we update these 1998 procedures so that this doesn't happen again?
We have not reviewed thoroughly all of the county's accounts. We've only looked at that specific issue. So we haven't looked to see if there are other pockets like that. Is there a possibility that some might exist? It's certainly a possibility that other agreements like that could exist, but we think this would be an anomaly at this particular time. And we also understand that the agreement that set this one up is in process of being terminated, or has been terminated. It has been.
Mr. Blansick, yeah, for some reason the microphones are not working very well, so you have to turn them off for somebody to turn theirs on.
So I guess to our knowledge, based on all the reviews that have taken place so far, it appears that this Medco arrangement is a unique circumstance. So we haven't come across any other kind of similar situation. We have been, over the course of the past year and a half, restructuring our relationship with Medco and the incubators. They are no longer our agent with respect to managing the 3 county incubators at Rockville, Germantown, and Silver Spring. That relationship terminated at the end of December. So we've restructured our relationship with them. We've taken over the debt that was outstanding with respect to 2 of the incubators, so now the county holds that directly and is not using Medco as a conduit.
Telling us that we think it's an anomaly is not very comforting. And if we haven't looked, I would encourage us to look, because $7.2 million in hidden money is what we're talking about today. And if we haven't looked, we're not going to find anything else. Wishing and praying isn't going to unearth it either. My final question is about the evaluation process, which was briefly alluded to. The report states that there was financial mismanagement due to problems collecting timely rent payments from the licensees of the incubator programs, and that Mr. Bang had direct management over that operation. But despite his mismanagement, he received, quote, the highest possible performance evaluation from 2 of his bosses. So during Mr. Bang's tenure with the county, was there ever performance evaluation stating concerns or questioning his ability with maybe any negative comments? Has anyone looked at past performance during his tenure?
We did not have access to the personnel records.
Okay. Again, that doesn't make me feel confident in the county's evaluation process. So that leads me to ask, how do staff complaints about management get documented? What exactly are the metrics for performance evaluations for senior management? And quite frankly, where is the accountability when staff members receive good performance for what we know is a lousy job, an illegal job?
Councilman, I share your concerns. I'm 1 month in. Those are certainly things I'll be looking into.
I'll let my colleagues ask the questions I know they have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm not going to belabor. I've had a chance to already talk to many of you about my concerns, and you've answered the majority of my questions, but I do want to lead my statement with what we talked about this morning. We just passed a bill, or not passed a bill, we introduced a bill. It'll be passed soon enough, I'm sure, with all of us signing on as co-sponsors. And this bill was about transparency. It was about making sure that although we feel as though we're headed in the right direction, we need to dot our I's and cross our T's. And so my question to you is that, do we feel as though, and there are some instances in which, and I know this is kind of uncomfortable for the executive branch, that there needs to be a legislative fix that goes along with our recommendations of how we move forward. Certainly, I think, again, setting something in stone versus something in practice that we hope to adhere to, that we hope gives us the answers that we need, is certainly a good start. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're dotting those I's and crossing our T's. And so, is there something legislatively that we need to do in terms of mandates, in terms of reporting, as well as in terms of procedures that we need to ensure that our department heads, as well as those that are right below them, need to adhere to? So, Mr. Klein.
I guess I'll ask the Inspector General if he has an opinion about that.
I haven't really given thought to anything that needs to be done in legislation yet, but I will give that some serious consideration, and we'll share that with Mr. Klein before we respond to that. But we'll give that some serious consideration and get back to you on that.
And I do want to indicate that council staff, together with OLO staff, are going to be doing our own assessment of whether there's anything we need to do to be able to strengthen the council's oversight role over this whole thing. And in early March, the Audit Committee is meeting, and we will hope to have our recommendations available to present to them at that time.
Right. And Councilman, we'll have the Inspector General will be following up on our compliance initiatives. Our internal auditor will be doing the same, and council staff. So I think it makes sense to, let's see if these actions are working, and if not, then we would certainly be open to discussing legislative fixes.
Well, let me just say, Mr. Klein, with all due respect, that I don't want to wait until I see if something's working. What I want to do is make sure that we have the procedures in place so that something doesn't happen again and not leave it up to chance or to goodwill. I think that, again, when it comes to this particular situation, we're not talking about a rank and file member of our organization. We're talking about a member who had carte blanche status to do whatever it is that they wanted. And those are the ones who are the most dangerous when it comes to then being able to cheat the system. And so from that perspective, I just really think, again, that we as the council need to consider what sorts of belts and suspenders we're going to put on this process to ensure that this kind of thing can't be left to chance again. Again, and it's not to question the will of all of you who've sat before us and who've done a lot of work in figuring out how this happened. I believe in your intent and your willingness and want to never see this happen again. However, I think that, again, us mandating that there are procedures in place that ensure that this doesn't happen and make sure that folks have to go through certain steps to do the many things that we saw Mr. Bang be able to do unchecked is still a significant concern of mine, even to this day. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Madam President.
Can I answer? So Councilmember Rice, and I think this goes back to the very first question that the Council President asked in her opening remarks about the view from the top, and that I know as a county resident, as a taxpayer, this is shocking and disappointing that this occurred, that it went on for so long. I have been part of conversations with several of the people here about looking at a lot of different programs and stepping back and saying, okay, I think we were making the assumption we're all good people, all trying to do the right thing. Maybe we should ask questions that weren't being asked. What controls are out there? We're giving money to this group, that group. What controls are there? Because yes, we know this person and they seem like a good person, so of course they wouldn't be doing fraud, but do we have the procedures there to back it up? And I think there is a very strong effort on the part of this group, on the part of this administration, to say, all right, let's rethink some of this, let's rethink some of these relationships, and let's start asking these hard questions that maybe we grew comfortable with the people we were working with, and so therefore we didn't even doubt what was happening. We need to have the right procedures in place and hold everyone to those procedures. And I think that change in culture is occurring from the top as a result of this.
And let me also add, what Marlene was referring to is that I actually asked our staff in anticipation of not only this discussion, but the work that we're going to be engaged in, to start thinking about how the council can strengthen our capacity for our oversight responsibilities. We have extraordinary staff and analysts, but it is just like you're taking a fresh look at everything. We need to do the same. And that way we can we will actually be able to continue to conduct our work the way it is intended. So our staff is already looking into this, and we will be sharing everything with all of you, and also solicit ideas from you as we work through all of this. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. Two policy areas that we may want to explore that is the county's financial disclosure process, as well as our whistleblowing policies, to strengthen those where possible, to ensure that there is yet another check and balance as we look at the large county government that we have. I also want to stress something and go back to something that Council President Navarro said earlier. And I agree with all the policy recommendations that have been made. I think they make sense. I think they're sound. But those policies are carried out by people. People who get sick, people who retire, people who move on, people who have to absorb the work of somebody else who has gotten sick or somebody else who has gotten retired. And I know for a fact, having been in the executive branch for 12 years, that many of the positions we've lost to budget savings are those middle management, administrative support positions that are critical to make sure that there's more eyes and ears looking at issues just like this. And so I would encourage the administration, as you're going through the very painful and difficult process of having to propose reductions moving forward, that there be a clear assessment done as positions are lost to retirement, or if early packages for retirement are offered, that we look at the impact of those particular positions and the people who have to absorb that work when those folks leave. I think that will be very important moving forward. I do have two questions. One, we of course since privatized our Department of Economic Development, and I'm curious as to the checks and balances that we have imposed on ourselves within county government. Are we looking at the feasibility of imposing those checks and balances as we write very large checks to important organizations that are doing important work and must be nimble to meet the growing demands and needs of our county, but to make sure that we don't have accountability from a third party?
I certainly will be. Haven't had that discussion yet, but I believe that the Economic Development Corporation should be part of our county stat program, for example, and that we should certainly be talking to them about their internal controls, because like you said, the vast majority of their funding is coming from county government, and we have every right and responsibility to ensure that that money is being spent appropriately and following the same kinds of controls that we're putting in place.
Great. I think that's it for now. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate it. I share the shock and outrage of, I think, all of my colleagues, and I believe everybody in the room, about learning of these theft of funds, millions of dollars of funds, misappropriation, operating without contracts. I mean, some of the things that we've always thought and prided Montgomery County as being a place where financial management is one of our calling cards, and obviously the significant shortcomings of falling short. Mr. Klein talked earlier about integrity, which I strongly believe in, but I think really we're talking about trust and the sacred trust that taxpayers put in us as government to invest their dollars appropriately and efficiently and effectively to serve the public good, and to do so conscientiously and with the level of oversight that we all would expect. And clearly that has not happened across the board. I think it's important to note that we're only talking about a small amount of the $5.7 billion budget here, but enough that I think that the trust that taxpayers have in us, understandably, has been harmed in a significant way. And I think this is an important exercise in order to get to restore that trust, to prove that we deserve it. And I think we have fallen short of that expectation, and I appreciate everybody's work in trying to bring that back. A few questions. First question is, we talked earlier, there was a mention of separation of duties and required documentation, and the inference that was made, it sounded to me, was that prior to 2017, the allocation of funds could be made without those and other obvious financial controls that would seem to be, almost lower than a basic level of expectation for the expenditure of public taxpayer dollars. Am I correct in inferring from what was said earlier that prior to 2017, the expectation of documentation in order to get funds spent and the separation of duties for somebody requesting money to be spent and another person looking at it and saying that's what it's supposed to go to and signing off that was not in place?
It was certainly not the case in the Department of Economic Development, because one person had control of all of that. So in the Department of Economic Development, when the former chief operating officer was in place, he had the ability to control the budgets. He had the sign-off authority. In most departments within the county, you have different people who have the budget authority. You have different people. You have a department director who signs off on the work of the chief operating officer. In the Department of Economic Development, the authority that the department director was supposed to have had been delegated to the chief operating officer, so he basically was able to sign off on his own work. And that's where that segregation of duties did not exist. And since he oversaw any administrative people that might have served as a check and balance on him, that check didn't exist. And so we're limiting that discussion to the Department of Economic Development, not to the county as a whole.
But just to follow up on Councilmember Glass's comment before, is that because we have looked at every other department and are confident that that was not the case in other departments, or that's because we focused this particular exercise on EDF grants and on the Department of Economic Development, where the IRS let us know that there was an issue. We looked into it. We expanded the scope of that at least to this one department and these particular types of funds and these particular pools of money, and that is the limited scope in which we have focused.
Initially, our scope was on the Department of Economic Development, but then I'm going to let Mr. Brogley address that, because his contractor did a more expansive review.
So thanks for the question. It's actually a good question, and it was the thing that was concerning us, that if this situation existed, this lack of an appropriate segregation of duties existed in one department, was it existing elsewhere? And that's why we did, one of the follow-on reviews that I had alluded to was we did a follow-on review where we required that each department identify who was assigned responsibility and had authority to do certain types of duties for budget, for financial management, for contract administration, for invoice processing even, to make sure that we weren't seeing kind of the same name popping up in those different roles, which is the situation that was found at DED. And what that review confirmed was we didn't see that situation elsewhere. It was a rather unique situation in DED that existed.
And is that a paper protocol or is that a practice? Reaching out to a department and asking who's responsible for what and how the organizational chart works is different from diving into each department and seeing how each expenditure happens and who's signing the check and how the request is being made.
That's a fair point. The first step was to do the paper. Tell us who is doing what. And those responses had to come back from the department directors. The follow-on review will be to go into specific departments and do focus reviews on who is in fact doing the following responsibilities to ensure that what was reported to us last fall in fact conforms with what is being done now. And that'll be particularly important as new people come in, as there's realignment of responsibilities, if you would, to make sure that that doesn't that situation doesn't exist.
So you expect to do that moving forward, but have not done that yet. So far, we're at paper protocol, but not practice, but we're going to dive in. Will the council get a report back on the determination and on that? And is your external consultant going to participate in that, or is that an internal function?
It'll be part of what we contract out to the external audit firm to do that, and it would be one of the reports that I would expect that we would be reporting back to the audit committee unless asked to provide a report elsewhere.
Okay, I'm not going to harp on this too much. I look forward to a further conversation on that. I have one final question. We focus mostly on the theft, but that was not the only part of the IG report before us. There was also the biohealth issue, and I just wanted to ask a question specific to that, and specific to moving forward and where things stand on it. I went back and looked at the initial appropriation from 2012 of the $250,000, which started the process. There was a lot more money that went out, and I noticed that there were 7 mentions in the very short bill. It's about a 2.5-page bill about a contract. And so the council, the prior council, obviously actually 2 prior councils ago, appropriated funds with the expectation of a contract. My impression, based on the IG report, is that there was no contract, but I'm interested in knowing whose role and responsibility when the council appropriates funds, when there are certain expectations tied to those funds, in this case, a contract being entered into, a non-competitive one in this particular case. Whose role is it to make sure that that happens? What is the oversight to make sure that it happens? And obviously, given the fact that it didn't happen here with the significant, this was just the first pool of subsequent pools of money that were handled, what practice do we have in place now that when this council moving forward appropriates funds for a particular purpose and those funds come with expectations as a matter of law that they're being fulfilled by the intent of the council, and that we can have some level of assurance that the money is being invested appropriately and conscientiously?
Once the council appropriates funds and names an entity on the grantee list, the using department, that's the department who is to administer the program, is obligated to enter into a contract, draft a contract, they don't enter into it. They draft the contract with the entity, the grantee. The contract then goes through a normal process. You get the signature of the department head recommending the contract. The grantee signs the contract is sent to the county attorney's office. My office reviews it for form and legality, and then it is sent to the Office of Procurement for signature. That is the normal process. What happened in the particular event that you're mentioning is the using department was economic development. They didn't do the first step. They didn't do a contract. They sent a request for payment to accounts payable. Accounts payable at that point had no way to backtrack to ensure that there was an underlying contract to support the request for payment. What we've done going forward, and this was a suggestion from the Inspector General, is that going forward, all of these non-procurement contracts have to flow through the county attorney's office. My office will be giving a unique identifier to each one of those contracts and then posting them onto an electronic platform that accounts payable can then access. So when accounts payable gets a request for payment, they can access the database that my office has created to ensure that there is in fact a contract. So if that had been in place and a request for a $250,000 payment would have risen to somebody's attention, and they would have said, well, let's see if there's in fact a contract.
So just so I'm clear, accounts payable, the previous practice was to issue the funds without documentation, just
Well,
based on the request of the...
They would have a
of the
sign-off, they would have an
department?
invoice signed off on by appropriate individuals in the department saying, yes, this is an appropriate payment, and they relied on, I think reasonably so, the assertion from officials in the using department.
I think this gets to, sorry. I think this gets to your initial question, Councilmember, which was the control environment at that point in time over these transactions that are exempt from the procurement process. Essentially, was that those controls and that segregation of duties and those approvals were the responsibility of the using department. So once those invoices were presented to accounts payable, the process dictated that they would look for those signatures, those approvals on those invoices, and that's how those payments were transacted at that point in time. Since then, obviously, we've changed that to build in additional controls and reviews and approvals outside of the department with respect to these exempt transactions, so that the department itself is not susceptible to any sort of circumventing of proper segregation of duties and controls. That's going to happen outside of that department and within accounts payable going forward. Well, since that change in
But other than that, there's no other role to make sure that any aspect of an appropriation of fund by the council is fulfilled by the using agency.
Well, there needs to be an appropriation, proper appropriation authorized within the budget to make that or to process that payment. Are you going to add something to that? No.
Okay.
It actually wouldn't have been a terribly difficult threshold to meet. The fact is, the appropriation was made, and I think the system that the county attorney and finance department director are discussing that is being put in place is fairly simple. The only issue is to make sure that whoever is processing the payment in finance has the ability to check to see if a contract actually exists. And what was happening at the time was the Department of Economic Development was simply making the assertion that a contract existed when in fact one didn't, and there was no ability at the time for the finance department to check to see to confirm whether or not the contract existed. So the simple thing that we've done is create a system with a unique identifier so that there can be a fairly simple match to ensure that there is in fact a contract in place. It's actually was not a very difficult system to put in place, and yet it's a fairly simple correction to the problem that should accomplish the purpose.
That's all I have. I have other questions for the audit committee, but that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President. Just a couple of questions, and thank you all for being here and spending the day with us for much of your day. I would just share my colleagues' dismay that this has happened and we are where we are, but also their resolve that we need to figure this out and update our policies and procedures, some of which you've done and some of which you're embarking upon to make sure that it doesn't happen again. I know when I ran for office, it was to say the number one role of a government official is to make sure your taxpayers' dollars are spent wisely and not used inappropriately. And so we all are very concerned about that. And I also want to second our council president's very active role in making sure the council has the staff and the resources that we need to do that and to be good partners with you as we try to oversee the almost $6 billion and tens of thousands of employees that are working on behalf of our residents here. Two quick questions, and I think this one is for you, Mr. Espinoza. related to the compliance unit that you mentioned in your opening remarks. Could you tell me a little more about, I think you said over transactions over 10,000, just what's the timeline for getting that up going, and then what's the mandate? Is there a more expansive mandate than that, or just could you give me a little more information on that?
Sure. The scope of coverage will be for, again, transactions that are exempt from the procurement process over 10,000. Payments below 10,000 happen within departments now directly as direct pays. As I indicated, we've been working on staffing up that unit. We've got the staff positions filled, and they're in the process of being trained up and starting to work and develop a work plan around it. And we expect to go live with the actual work plan and implementation of the workflow process, as well as initiating these reviews starting February 1st. We did make an announcement.
Would that include the reviews that were discussed by gentlemen here as far as looking, are there other areas in government where we're not sure about the processes and procedures? Is that totally separate?
Yeah, that's separate. That's internal audit. They'll be looking more enterprise-wide. Ours will be focused on, processing these transactions. Yeah,
the transactions themselves. Correct. Okay. And I'd love, I know, I'm sure GO committee and audit committee, but I'd love to be kept abreast. I'm just telling you individually of how that's moving along, and if there's ways, to Councilmember Rice's point, are the things we need to be doing to help you guys get that going in the correct way. Another question about email procedure. I know that something that stuck out to me was that there was, and we've heard a lot about emails in the last few years, but that there was a kind of misuse at a minimum of email by subordinates of the director of the office, the Economic Development Office. Do we have procedures in place to guard against that, or policies in place? Improper email use, delegating your email to other people. Do we have anything in place for that? And yeah, go ahead.
We do have specific policies and procedures in place. There's an annual training requirement on IT security and things that you're not supposed to be doing and that are prohibited practices. Obviously, in this case, the two of the individuals involved at the more senior levels, for whatever reason that I'm not really clear on, ignored those. And in fact, there is a renewed emphasis starting February of highlighting security threats and practices and things you're not supposed to do with sharing your passwords and the consequences if we find out that you have shared your password with someone else, and the bad things that can result if you share your password, login credentials with someone else, so that there's like a monthly training that all county employees now are going to have to go through to help make that a reminder fresh with them.
Thank you. And the last point I'll make is just on the silos. The last question, you talked about how accounts payable, I think you sir, accounts payable didn't know that there wasn't a contract, so they just did their job. They processed their widget in the way that they thought they should. In a government as big as we are, I would just encourage us always to be looking at how can we break down these silos within government so that we're being more lateral in our communication. And so this is kind of a charge to you, and I'm sure you're embarking upon this, but I think that was clearly one of the many breakdowns in the process, is that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So to close, I don't see any other lights, but I think that another area that it's going to be really important as we move forward is to rethink this notion of our incubator program, and as well as the whole business innovation network, our biohealth initiatives. I mean, these are very important policy areas for us, obviously, and it is very critical that we also take a step back and take a look at how can we best achieve the goals of these particular programs given some of these circumstances, and also look at some areas that, in my opinion, were left behind. I mean, we've had lots of conversations about service-oriented small businesses that don't have a place in this approach, with the incubators. And lo and behold, the data has shown how, many small businesses there are out there who are in this category and really do need some structure support. So in many ways, this offers an opportunity to take a look at not just, the biohealth or biotech, life science, but also this other extraordinary large, sector of our small business ecosystem, and how to move forward. And so that's another thing that I'm looking forward to, not only hearing from the executive side, but obviously on the council, we will we'll have discussions about that and see how we can marry that. And then secondly, just the capacity for the executive and the department to execute these recommendations from the IG report. Obviously, is something we need to look at very closely, because I know dollars are tight, but I assume that many of these recommendations are going to need additional capacity in departments, and we need to be mindful of that as well. Okay, I guess Councilor Reamer is closing us off.
Just wanted to say we are definitely going to take up the incubator network, and it's in the plan for our committee to review what we're doing and what kind of changes we need to make. So in fact, we were going to have a meeting this week on it with launch workplaces and how it does some of this work, but I understand we're going to need to delay that for another week or two as you guys are continuing to do your diligence there. So we'll take that up as soon as we can, but it's a big topic. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate everybody being here. This is not the end of this conversation, obviously. We will continue to be actively engaged in following up on the way and the timeline of these, how these recommendations will be implemented, and then we'll also work through our committee structure to make sure that we're constantly looking at all of this and ensuring that we're strengthening all of those areas of oversight, as well as our capacity on the council to continue to do our work. So with that, appreciate it, and I believe that the Education and Culture Committee will be meeting at the third conference room at 4 o'clock to start the savings plan work sessions. Thank you so much.